purpose of the attack was to kill as many people as possible. The strike hit the city beach, where at the height of Sunday afternoon there were many people with children on vacation. The Kiev regime committed the exact same crime almost 10 years ago on the 13th of August 2014. Back in the day, the armed forces of Ukraine air-bombed the town of Zugres of the DPR and hit a local children's beach. You can find this in the archive. 13 people were killed that day, including 3 children. Another 30 people were injured as a result of the terrorist attack in Sevastopol on the 23rd of June. 4 people were killed, including 2 young children. 144 civilians were injured of varying severity. 82 of them were admitted to hospital, including 27 children. What happened next? On the 24th of June, 22 seriously wounded people, including 12 children, were taken by a special aircraft of the Russian Emircom Ministry to Moscow. They will undergo further treatment here in Moscow. Let's have a look at the feedback from the so-called enlightened international community. As it cares so much about human rights, it always extends its helping hand, provides humanitarian supplies urgently, while mobilizing at the same time the civil society. Washington, London, and Brussels, without whose experts these terrorist attacks would not have been possible, they deny their involvement and pretend to know nothing. The EU spokesman Peter Stano went so far as to call reports about the use of missiles in Sevastopol unreliable. Well, there are 2 options. It is either a degree of unprofessionalism passing all potential marks, or it represents cynical policy, which in our language is normally expressed as no matter what you do, they don't care. The U.S. Department of State spokesman Matthew Miller cynically characterized the Russian Foreign Ministry's statement about U.S. responsibility for the attack on civilians in Sevastopol as ridiculous, hyperbolic, and not supported by facts. There is nothing to add here. There were no condolences or even words of sympathy for the victims. As has always been throughout the recent years, representatives of NATO countries will defend the criminal Kiev regime to the last and turn a blind eye to the atrocities against Russian people, because they only fulfill an order in exchange for huge amounts of money. This only strengthens the feeling of impunity in the Bankavaya. I believe a lot of statements, thousands of statements were made by the Kiev regime in the recent years with different degrees of cruelty or inhumanity, but what Mikhail Podolyak, advisor to the head of the office of the President of Ukraine, what he said is beyond. It's totally from a different class. A mentally ill person would say something like that, or a person with distorted perception of our planet or civilization. He called all the residents of Crimea, and I quote him, civilian occupants. What kind of term is this? Where do they coin them? And the territory of the peninsula, according to Mikhail Podolyak, is a large military camp and a warehouse with hundreds of direct military targets. Thus, recognizing the planned nature of the terrorist attack, he immediately declared that for the Kiev regime, whatever is hosted by Crimea or Sevastopol represent military targets, whereas people that, according to Zelensky himself, remain Ukrainian citizens, although they do not consider themselves as such, but described by Zelensky as such. But according to Zelensky and all his group, they describe them as occupants. Well, it is either a case of dichotomy, a mental asylum case, if you will, or they want to make the situation so complicated so that nobody understands nothing. None of the Westerners even dared to check their puppets, although I would use a different word when they are doing this for money without any love whatsoever. Judging by the amount of comments in the media space, it illustrates global dehumanization processes in Ukraine. We also noted a statement by U.S. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who on June 23rd noted that the reaction abroad, overseas, within the scope of responsibility of the U.S. Metropole would have been totally different if Russia, using a Russian satellite, and quote her, had fired cluster munitions on a Florida beach. Nothing surprising to this. Maybe Congress, the Congresswoman may be unaware of the declaration of the DOS declarations, who said that not everything from the UN Security Council is to be fulfilled. If I translate this, that would mean what is of benefit to the United States and its allies, they will fulfill. If it is of no benefit to them, they will not fulfill this. If it is of benefit to somebody else, that would not be a reason sufficient for the United States to make this provision mandatory for them. Maybe the U.S. Congress is unaware, but the statements were made by the officials of the United States with regard to the so-called International Criminal Court, the so-called court, when Washington clearly described its attitude to this entity. Whenever this entity decides against U.S. interests or its allies, then the United States would take steps against the International Criminal Court. If the ICC dared take any steps against the United States of America, maybe they would fire a couple of missiles against it too. That's what I'm talking about. It is beyond double standards. It is the primacy of arbitrariness and attitude to lawfulness. The Russian law enforcement agencies are carefully recording crimes of Ukrainian neo-Nazis. Those involved are being identified and brought to justice. A couple more words on the punishment. The courts of the Russian Federation, on the basis of evidence from the Russian Investigative Committee, continue to pass sentences on Ukrainian neo-Nazis who have committed grave crimes against civilians. To give you a case in point, 27 years in prison were given to a Ukrainian National Guard militant Karol, who fired on a civilian car with two civilians in Mariupol on March 14, 2022. As a result of this, people died right on the spot. 5 years of prison were given to the citizen of Ukraine, Grudnenko, who planned a terrorist attack in the locality of Tokmak in Zaporizhia region. It was identified that in the spring of 2023, he was collecting information about the deployment of Russian troops in Tokmak, and in May 2023, he was given the coordinates with a hidden improvised explosive device. Using his experiences in the armed forces of Ukraine, he identified 3 facilities where servicemen were stationed to carry out a terrorist attack. Fortunately, thanks to the coordinated actions of the Russian law enforcement agencies, he was unable to carry out his plan. These are just several examples. I would like to use this occasion, since we are here at the St. Petersburg International Legal Forum, I would like to extend my sincere appreciation and gratitude to our law enforcement specialists in all our agencies, departments, and ministries who are doing this difficult work in the context of hostilities. They collect evidence, facts, the field sites, they stay at these sites in order for this feeling of impunity to be punished and to show to everyone that as we discuss legal perspective on the actions of the Ukrainian regime, it is the work in progress, which is they are working on the future outcomes, but they are also working on the current aspects with tangible results. We also follow reports in the Western media and discussions that the so-called political scientific fora, another trend or narrative as it is often described in the West, a new trend which has not yet been discussed previously. The essence thereof follows. Now and then we would hear about the plans of the Kiev regime to organize against on the eve of the NATO summit on the 8th to the 9th of July another counteroffensive. The previous counteroffensive was just a failure for the Kiev regime, but similarly all the money is been given. They have received the order, and now as we approach the American election, U.S. Democrats need some facts, at the very least, to support their project, the Kiev regime, to keep the topic afloat. Those in the bunker do not take into account the fact that the outcomes of this reckless operation may be even more tragic in comparison to the previous reckless operation in the summer 2023. Now everything is at stake. The Kiev regime wants to demonstrate to its masters that junta is ready to resist, and for this sake they would be ready to send tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians, everyone they can find to and this is also important for the White House in order to add this to the election campaign of Biden. In his foreign policy, he put stakes on the Ukraine project. What else is there for him to produce? I thought we had simultaneous interpreting. We are speaking in Russian here, colleagues. For the foreign political track, the Biden administration has nothing to offer or produce. Look at the Middle Eastern context. Look at other regions or situations. Maybe the EU is applauding to what the so-called allies from the US made to them, but this is something we will discuss further. There have been a lot of questions before the briefing, and there are self-explanatory figures. The US foreign policy is a failure everywhere, unless we take into account waves of chaos. If it is their achievement, then yes, they are totally successful. There is more chaos in the world, but Obama, representing liberal Democrats, used to say some 7 years ago that the world is more predictable and safe. Now we see how safe and predictable it is. On the 23rd of June, the Philadelphia Inquirer published an interview of the head of the main intelligence directorate of the Ukraine Defense Ministry, Kirill Budanov, who rejects peace talks and calls for escalation of the conflict and acts of international terrorism. He said that the Kiev regime allegedly has no choice but to return what had been occupied, and I quote him. All this, again, confirms that the Zelensky regime and its Western supervisors do not care the least about the fate of Ukraine or its inhabitants. They don't care about the sufferings of the citizens who will bear all the burdens of such an escalation. I don't know what to prioritize here. Let me just enumerate. All this represents pieces of one picture: the destroyed Ukrainian statehood, gutted economy, industry, production, the territory that was previously called Ukraine, killed by the Kiev regime. I don't know what figure to adduce. They are simply committing genocide against their own people. And to add to this tragedy, there is one more. I'm talking about multi-million, multi-billion loans that Zelensky took for the future of those who will live in Ukraine. I mean, it is the money that would have to be repaid. Not a single cent has been given for free. They are now either taking land, national economic facilities, or industrial enterprises. I'm not talking about the modern Ukraine. I'm talking about its Soviet past. Or they are giving money on pledge of future repayments. Now, while committing genocide against their own people, Zelensky is also adding to these colossal obligations should people live in this territory. There is no future for them. I mean, the repayments would be like tributes. These are not loan repayments. This is the tribute for the people, for the nation to pay. What kind of bright future is this? All this for the sake of somebody in the White House to become wealthier or to extend their mandate for God knows how many days, or for someone from the Western elite, self-proclaimed elite, by the way, for their own prosperity and well-being, and of course for their own belonging to these global elites, illusionary belonging to these elites. Now we describe the developments there with regard to the financial situation. The arms for the Kiev regime, that is now the world's biggest importer, these arms are becoming more and more expensive. On the 16th of June, Sunday Times interview was published an interview with the former director of Defense Procurement Agency, Ukrainian Defense Ministry, created in 2022, Vladimir Pikuzo. With the increased needs of the armed forces of Ukraine, intermediaries are actively profiting from Ukraine, in addition to the tragedy currently faced by the Ukrainian people. This is all based on the money. A round of the Grad MLRS system has risen in Ukraine over the past 2 years from $1,000 to $6,000.
For 125 millimeter projectile now costs about $7.5 thousand instead of $1.2 thousand. He also said, Mr. Pikuza, that in order to change the situation, Ukraine will be compelled to spend, and I quote, 3 or 4 times higher than the defense budget. Can you guess what country? Of course, it's not Ukraine. China. And that is amid the fact that China, in terms of economy, is one of the global leaders. And let me remind you what is defense budget represents. It's $200 billion. The dismissed official, Mr. Pikuza, confesses, and I quote, corruption in Ukraine is an ally in purchases of weapons in third countries. There are no words. I'm speechless. I want to find some explanation. But I think they're in such an impasse by themselves They do not need any mosques. They reached the end. But let me once again reiterate, and I quote once again, corruption, following the words of Mr. Podolyak, is an ally in purchases of weapons in third countries. As he said, sometimes we make the things which is banned by its own legislation. Hopefully that Mr. Assange is liberated from prison. This man who was persecuted everywhere, who stayed in prison in Ecuador embassies, and then he was kept for 5 years in prison of the United Kingdom in terrible conditions. But even the West, the special rapporteurs of the United Nations said that these were tortures. So why this person suffered for so many years? He suffered for making possible and for making available the truth, the true information to the public, which revealed the nature of the same ventures on tortures, weapons supplies, and occupation of the sovereign states. I mean, the United States occupied Iraq, along with its coalition led by the United Kingdom. And this person was persecuted by the so-called Western justice for many years. Right now, the Kiev regime directly confesses, that it commits the crimes with speculations and fakes in trade in arms at the global level. Have you heard any US official or the International Criminal Court who made this puzzle, make up this puzzle? Not to mention about all these speculations, in particular Iraq, in all these speculations, none was held responsible. I mean, the US official or military official was held responsible to anywhere. These were some local cases when the United Kingdom military tortured the local population, and it was made available to public thanks to Assange. I think these are not comparable things. These are deadly conditions in American prisons when they tortured all those who came from Middle East or Northern Africa. Back then, these local cases, individual cases. But as for the global changes of life through destruction of countries, sovereign and independent, that led and claimed deaths, for example, in Iraq, these are about 500,000 million of civilians died in Iraq, and no one was held responsible. And the United Kingdom just once said, we admit that there was a pretext, and we have not chosen the right pretext. In other words, they did something wrong. Here we see direct confessions of officials in Ukraine that the corruption, including corruption with manipulations with weapons, trade in weapons, by the man who was the head of the Kiev regime, or the leaders of the Kiev regime. This was a state policy for many years, and there was no response. That today's Ukraine has become a rotten state which contaminates with its corruption plague all other countries. I think we should talk about this at the relevant platforms. Mutually beneficial cooperation must be understandable to the overwhelming majority. And I think that this cooperation with the Kiev regime will do harm, because no one can count all the many myriads of promises broken. Just make money. I mean, the weapon barons all across the world. And I think right now they feel the masters of the world. And I would like to remind you that all this Kiev corruption that is made with the money of ordinary taxpayers, honest taxpayers, private companies who sponsor, who are just sponsors. These are money of the taxpayers, and not the US taxpayers, but the EU taxpayers as well, without any consent to this. We are significantly scared for the security of navigation in the Black Sea, who deliberately mine its coastal areas, and the American journalists are being concerned about this fact. On the 24th June, the Wall Street Journal released an article which said that the Ukrainian armed forces use plastic mines, which are hard to detect by the onboard equipment, while the Kiev regime invites the international community to business, encourages supplies in Ukraine and in the Black Sea. For these mines, they use Sea Baby drones. From day one of the military operation, Ukraine has already started mining. And then, back then, all these mines drifted. I think these mines do not have artificial intelligence. Then they would understand that they need to go somewhere to Russia. But unfortunately, they were located near the coastline of Turkey, Bulgaria. I think that this will be the same case this time. But who thinks about this? Of course, no one. If they get such a present in the high tourist season, then they will think about it. Now about mobilization in Ukraine, which is being waged there. The procedure of updating of the information, personal information of the conscripts is being continued with the timeline July 16th. Up to date, 2,003,000 people have already done so, and about 1.1 million were admitted as available to military service. It means that they should not become just soldiers to defend their countries and interests, but to the tombs, right to the tombs they will be sent. So what else does it mean? It means that the Ukrainians don't have any possibility to contest such a decision. Of course, you can say that they can appeal to the court, but within the last 8 months, no judicial proceeding against the military commissariats has been won by the civilians. The Minister of Justice of Ukraine, Denis Maluska, said, within the lack of the draft card, the Ukrainians will be denied in registration and divorce, as well as other civil acts. And what are they? These are birth, death, and I think many not so relevant, for example, the change of the name. But birth and death, what can they do about it? Will they be denied of it? By the way, these are the registration of the property. Everything is frozen, everything is suspended. If a person is not enrolled in these lists, which should go to the tomb, the notary services, international legal aid, it will be denied. If this person, for example, did not update its information, unprecedented mobilization triggers discontent among population and warms up hatred. There are more and more attacks on military commissaries, beatings, and arsons. Many can say that this is quite logic. They do everything to inflict a defeat to us. It seems that this internal civil confrontation in Ukraine, we must rejoice, should have rejoiced. And maybe according to the Western logic, that is the case. But we understand that the Kiev regime acts contrary to the interests of its people and does not defend its national interests, maybe which are something in common with us. No, they're just processing and making money sent by the West to them. Let me remind you the words from the Western countries when the pandemic started. It was suffering. There were sufferings to us. And the vaccine, to us, this was an occasion, and we wanted to share it in order to engage everyone to produce it together. And for them, it was a kind of a possibility, and I quote, the leading Western public figures to reduce population. I think it does not fit. I think it fits the logic of Zelensky, the concept of liberal Democrats and Zelensky and all them who made an oath to them to reduce population of the earth. I think that is true. This is very deadly technique they resort to because they do it against their own people. The Third Reich acted against those whom it considered aliens and not equal to them. The Kiev regime went even further. These techniques are being used against their own people. But in the words, they speak that these are their people. That such incidents are being fixed in Dnipropetrovsk, Odessa, Kiev, and other cities. People do not want to become a cannon fodder. They flee. In order to catch all those who run, an additional troops of army were allocated. But years will go, and ethnic civilians of Ukraine will understand what they went through. And as soon as they understand, the more they can preserve their lives for themselves and for their future generations. I think, and let me quote, to be very Evangelion, and I would like to quote Bible and Gospel. By seeing they do not see, and by understanding they do not understand. But the explanation was what Jesus Christ was talking to people with the tales, that by seeing they do not see, and by hearing they do not hear, and by understanding they do not understand. It was written down 2,000 years ago. That is the modern interpretation of the words. Everything is telling. And such a scourge came to each family, but they consider being unaware of what is happening. And this army of the Kiev regime, who was sent to Moldavia, Hungary, and Slovakia, received a blank check, even to shoot to kill. All those who go to Ukraine, you think? No, to those who flee. Shot to kill. All those who went abroad consider being unaware of what is happening. And this army of the Kiev regime, who was sent to Moldavia, Hungary, and Slovakia, received a blank check, even to shoot to kill. All those who go to Ukraine, you think? No, to those who flee. Shot to kill. All those who went abroad from Ukraine do not want to return. It is known that Germany provided asylum to the Symphonic Orchestra of Kiev. Two-thirds of them, these are men of conscript age, 73 people, and with their families, 130 people, received accommodation in Heim am Rhein, and they will stay in Germany for the next 3 years. I think these administration, the Western administration, they were told that they flee from Russia, but in fact, this is not true. Let me remind you, in 2022, why the diplomats, Russian diplomats, were expelled from Poland? Because the considerable part of them from Ukraine tried through Poland to come to Russia, and that is why the Polish authorities ordered to accept everyone, even without passports, but to make them leave the country, even if they go further, and they cannot return to Russia. But nevertheless, people managed to do so through Kaliningrad, Belarus. But the Russian diplomats, why they were expelled? So that they could not help them and assist them in helping to flee from regime, so that they could not receive support from our diplomats. But nevertheless, our diplomats helped in remote mode and did everything they could do to help people to come to Russia. Right now, through all this time, now we see the evidence. The Ukrainian citizens flee their own government, their own president. Oppressive measures does not help Zelensky. His mobilization plan is being hardly implemented, and this triggers fugitives, and it can reach about 200,000 people. In order to make order in the army, a military police is being established with extended powers. I think it is not the police. The police should act according to law, and its main function is maintaining the order. And when it comes to this police, it implements the functions, some invented functions. In fact, they use inhumane techniques. This new subdivision in the police of Ukraine is completely under control of Zelensky. Its law, the law in its establishment was accepted on June 21st in the first reading. There is another side of the word. They believe that the main reason for the military police is another, but these are interrelated. The fact is, in Ukraine, people are starting to ask questions about legitimacy of Zelensky.
And hence, those in the bunker are afraid that these people with their discontent would provoke massive riots or uprisings, and the Ukrainians would flee from the front, thus collapsing the front. So the Maidan story was imposed on Ukraine very well. It has been rehearsed a couple of times, so they know what things they fear. As they are afraid of this prospect, they do not connect their future with the grateful citizens, because they know what the citizens will do to them. What I have just described again confirms the relevance of the tasks of the special military operation, as has been declared by the Russian leadership. All of them will definitely be accomplished. To give you several more facts, following the commands from Washington, South Korean and Romanian authorities are more and more involved in the supplies of arms in Seoul and Bucharest, they are forgetting their national interest, and they are also forgetting the implications against against the backdrop of unprecedented escalation in Asia and other countries, and in Europe. They are totally sprinkling false assurances, ignoring growing social economic problems that widely use their taxpayers' money to support the Kiev regime. Recently, it was announced that the Romanian side agreed to Washington's demand to transfer to Ukraine one of the expensive Patriot anti-aircraft missile systems previously purchased from the Americans. The supply of South Korean howitzers, worth almost $1 billion is doomed from the outset to turn to a contribution paid out of Romanian pockets to delay the imminent defeat of the Ukrainian armed forces now in Ukraine, and all kinds of manipulations. On the 12th of June, the UN Security Council saw a report of the UN Secretary General on Children and Armed Conflict for 2023. It includes many sections. It considers multiple situations, but there is also the Ukrainian section. It is characterized by positive changes in the overall statistics on children. 543 victims are mentioned compared to 1,482 last year. At the same time, the UN Secretary General positively notes Russia's, and I quote him, practical preventive measures to protect minors, and as well as, and I quote again, continued engagements of the government of the Russian Federation with the special representative of the UN Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflict to prevent grave violations against children. At the same time, the change in the structure of the list of parties committing grave violations against children annexed to the report is noteworthy. Previously, its sections included parties taking measures to protect children's rights, which included Russia, and parties not acting in this area. The current version implies only two categories: state and non-state actors. The Russian side, accordingly, is characterized as a state actor. We are not surprised that the Kiev regime tried to take advantage of the change in the structure of the UN Secretary General's report by circulating in the UN Security Council a commentary by its foreign ministry which expresses satisfaction with Russia's absence among the parties taking measures to protect children's rights, and unjustifiably attributes inaction in the protection of children's rights. I want to put the record straight. Our experts analyzed the documents, and we would like to say the following. Firstly, due to the change in the structure of the report, there is no longer a section with the document indicating the parties taking measures to protect children's rights. If we follow the rationale of the Kiev regime, then there are no longer any countries taking measures to protect children's rights. So when as Zelensky said, the Ukraine diplomacy became more impudent. It became also very stupid. I don't know for whom, maybe for their own people. Secondly, the Ukrainian insinuations are refuted by Mr. Guterres himself, who noted in the document cooperativeness shown by the Russian side in this area. Thirdly, the allegation of Moscow's inaction is also false. The Presidential Ombudsman for Children's Rights, Ms. Vorbilova, is doing a great deal of work on this front. She provided interview, and the footage is available on the website and on social media. This month, she presented another consolidated bulletin on the activities of the Institute of Ombudsperson for Children's Rights in protecting the rights of minors during the special military operation. It contains information on measures to support families with children and children's social institutions, minors in need for medical care, rehabilitation, neglected children, orphans, and children left without parental care. The document also devotes considerable attention to the Commission of work to reunite families separated as a result of hostilities and to refute misleading information. Anyone wishing, including the Ukrainian side, considering that they have been very active in the UN Security Council and also the Secretary General, anyone can read the English version of the document, which is available online. We will not allow anyone to manipulate the specifics of the presentation by the United Nations Secretariat of its data, including on children and the armed conflict. Another global topic. We received a lot of questions asking us to comment on what was said during the meeting between the Russian president and the Russian foreign minister on the 14th of June. We processed all the questions we received, and the main essence was to explain the initiative of the Russian president to build a new continental security architecture in Eurasia. So we would like to comment on all these questions that we received. We regret to say that the Euro-Atlantic security system that had been in detail covered by the Russian president during his meeting with the heads of the Russian foreign ministry, this system has been completely discredited by the United States and satellites. Although they created it originally, everything they would touch would corrode sooner or later. For decades, they have pursued a provocative policy for military and political development of the territories adjacent to our border, pushed NATO's military infrastructure eastward, and then unleashed a hybrid war against us. Today, the West openly speaks of the need to, and I quote the doctrinal documents, inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. They take attempts to build a non-inclusive security system at the expense of others, that is, directed in general against our country. At the same time, Washington and Brussels are stirring up hotbeds of tension in other parts of Eurasia, including in the Middle East, in the Asia-Pacific region. Behind this is nothing but a desire to maintain their dominance they are obsessed with, either elusive or they never had from day one. It is of no importance. It's for political scientists or historians to decide. There is no longer such dominance, but they try to maintain the feeling of being dominant by turning the entire continent into an arena of geopolitical confrontation, imposing new dividing lines and imposing Cold War bloc mentality, but the main part by setting parties on one another at these dividing lines. But it is not our intention to be drawn into new bloc confrontation in the spirit of zero-sum games, as is stated in the paragraph 54 of the foreign policy concept of the Russian Federation, approved by the President of March on the 31st of March 2023. And I quote this document directly: Russia seeks to transform Eurasia into a single continental space of peace, stability, mutual trust, development, and prosperity. This provision establishes a normative framework for building Eurasian architecture of security and cooperation. In his address to the Federal Assembly on the 29th of February 2024, the President of the Russian Federation pointed out the need to intensify efforts in order to create, in the near future, an equal and indivisible security circuit in Eurasia. And he also expressed his readiness for a substantive conversation on this topic with all interested countries and associations. On June 14, 2024, the meeting with the heads of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Vladimir Putin outlined the main elements and parameters of the Russian initiatives. We're talking about establishing a constructive, mutually respectful dialogue between all potential participants of the future security system in Greater Eurasia. We proceed from the assumption that geographical proximity and being on the same continent prompts us to search together ways for peaceful coexistence. Such a system should be open to all Eurasian countries should they wish to participate in it, including Western European countries, provided that they abandon their confrontational policy. The President of Russia mentioned that it may look unrealistic nowadays, but he set the goal. Well, the realistic nature of this mandate this mandate has been made realistic by the fact that the Euro-Atlantic security system that is covered by the OSCE space, it failed. Should we start a new system of security, we would lose skills of dialogue, we would lose the aspects that were destroyed by hegemonic aspirations of the West. It would result in issues that would be more difficult to cope with in the future if we don't do so now. Another important area of the effort is the broad involvement of interstate associations as backbone elements of the space of peace, stability, and cooperation in Eurasia, and the integration of the achievements in the relevant areas. We're talking about the CSTO, CIS, SCO, EAU, Conference on Interaction and Confidence Building Measure in Asia, ASEAN, the Cooperation Council for the Arab States of the Persian Gulf, Arab League. Many of these associations deal with the collective security of their members in relevant spheres. Hence, it is necessary to establish direct ties between them as well as the practical interaction. States and regional entities should themselves determine the areas of cooperation and improve the system of institutions, mechanisms, and arrangements that serve to achieve a common goal. At the same time, economic, social welfare, integration, and mutual beneficial cooperation should be an important part of the joint work. Now, turning to realistic aspect. If the world, humanity, in the 40s, when it was on fire, when the globe was on fire because of the terror of World War II, the Great Patriotic War to us, if anyone had told them that several years after the globe, different nukes of the world would see decolonization, nations that were oppressed for centuries would gain sovereignty, independence, that would have caused tears in spite of laughter. Tears because there were many things to deplore, and laugh because it looked like a myth, would have looked like a myth back in the day, but still it prevailed, it succeeded. There have been a lot of decolonization processes, and tens of countries gained freedom they could not even dream of, not because they were colonies, but because they were slaves. These are different things. In some parts of the world it were colonies, some were slave markets that were used to sell families, and some the most fit one were picked from families as resources, and they were sent to ensure the prosperity of the West. Back in the day, this mission looked beyond impossible, illusional, if I may, but it did come out. It did come out, rather, thanks to the victory of the Soviet Union in the Great Patriotic War, or World War II, and the political capital that the Soviet Union earned as a victor country. It invested this capital not in its own exclusiveness and domination as opposed to the West, but instead in the freedom of those who could not dream of such freedom. These are similar processes. The sooner the understanding of this trend dawns on everyone, the quicker will we attain the goals planned. We're not talking about building a political organization, a military alliance, or another bloc entity. We're talking about building a system of interaction on the basis of complementary multi-level agreements with a varying membership. As you can see, things become more complicated in the world, or rather more complex in terms of new opportunities, less primitive, more sophisticated. Well, I mean, this is is not a simple system that we propose. It is not a simple piece of architecture. Probably it could be compared to a 3D model. It's not a planar work, but a voluminous piece of work. But there is no other more interesting goal that would truly meet the values that were categorized by humanity as such. None of such goal exists nowadays. What do we have on the other side of the coin? Domination of, or rather, what do we have on the other cup of the balance? Domination of the exclusive. No, this will not happen. This architecture will not be against anyone. Its parameters will make it possible not only to ensure durable peace, but also to avoid major geopolitical upheavals as a result of a crisis, globalization based on Western models. It will create reliable military and political guarantees to protect both Russia and other countries of the macro region from external threats. It will create a conflict-free and development-friendly space and eliminate the destabilizing influence of extra-regional stakeholders on Eurasian processes. In the long term, it will mean that the phasing out of the military presence of external powers in Eurasia. I would like to use several examples here too. Like Tsiolkovsky considered back in the day about space flights. Those around him could not even believe this. What kind of breakthrough mentality he had decades after it came true in the form of the first step of the first Russian Sputnik, first living beings being set into outer space, human being sent to outer space, a human being entering outer space, and we do not even realize now that a lot of communications that are taking place through outer space, we don't give it a thought nowadays, but previously it was a bold fantasy. Now on the backbones, on the prerequisites, every process has a prerequisite. Macroeconomic statistics of G20 shows unprecedented change in the balance of power and finance. It is reality. The main trend is that there is steady strengthening of the positions of the countries of the global south and east against the backdrop of the historical reduction of the G7 weight. By the end of 2023, the share of BRICS countries in global GDP in purchasing power parity increased to 35%, exceeding the share of the G7 amount of 30.3%. The data published by the OECD for the first quarter of this year, these data confidently confirm this trend. India grew by 8.4% compared to the first quarter 2023, Turkey by 7.4%, China by 5.3%. Russia is not lagging behind with 5.4%, according to the Russian Agency of Statistics. At the same time, the majority of the world countries, on the contrary, are stagnating. These trends will be adjusted as well, but they reflect reality. The growth rates of the EU and the UK fluctuate within the arithmetic error, 0.5%, 0.2% respectively. The economies of Germany and Japan are shrinking, -0.2%, -0.3% correspondingly.
New global centers, first and foremost Asia, Africa, Latin America, are drivers of economic boost and advancement to a new just polycentric world order. It is quite predictable their central role in the global arena that is being shown, in particular, the more consolidation and self-sustainability of the global majority within G20, the main platform of national economic and financial cooperation. The number of presidencies in the G20 of the emerging economies and our partners in BRICS, Indonesia in 2022, India in 2023, Brazil in 2024, South Africa in 2025, make it possible to focus on the relevant agenda in order to really develop a just reform of global governance, balanced energy transition. One of the main achievements was inclusion in 2023 of the African Union to the G20 as a full-fledged member. In this context, any attempts of the Western associations to cover up the real position and the real situation are very pathetic, and we are seeing such trends. And by the way, there are prerequisites why this is happening. Because of the policy initiated by the West with its own hands. Not everyone agreed with it, but this was an intent of the West. All the sanction history, sanction policy, which covered up the true nature and goals which were formulated as trade war, they pick up a fight. Eurasian unilateral sanctions against Russia weakened the economies of EU countries. They were deprived of their main advantage of the privileged access to a resource base, including energy. The European Union, since introduction of sanctions, overpaid more than 200,000 euros for gas. Actually, they are very economic, and they save the money. And Germany proposed to reconsider help to African countries because they suffer financial costs. They lost even 200 billion euros. And why? They say that these are because Ukraine and Russia, but that is not true. We've proposed for 7 years to them to implement the Minsk agreements, and that would be a response to the current challenges. But they decided to make some experiments, and everything will go smooth. And I think we are the best threat to them. But something went wrong. The Fund of Direct Investments, the aggregated deficit exceeded $700 billion. By the end of 2024, it can amount to $1 trillion. According to European Commission, the main areas of economic activities of Germany, Italy, Netherlands, and France continued stagnation. In the European Commission, it's about to admit that the termination of energy cooperation with Russia does not make it possible to the huge producers of EU to remain competitive. They are so open. They have many commissions and subcommissions, groups, some research centers, and processes. So let them investigate inside their commission who was behind this refusal to cooperate with Russian energy. I think they can identify this person. Maybe this is a group of persons, some criminal group. Car industry of Germany, the United Kingdom, Japan suffered a lot from anti-Russia sanctions. In Germany suffered and Japan suffered the most. It was not because the fact that we buy less cars, but by the fact that we buy more Chinese cars, and they will bolster their positions. The car producers, it's not Russia's legend. It's not Russia who invented this, who decided to segregate the Japanese producers by saying that we share different values. So please withdraw from Russia. There were many joint ventures, but the United States ordered Japan that everything will be fine there if they refuse cooperation with Russia. Now they do not say how Japan should act further with its cars. Car producers are compelled to sell business or co-production or transfer to the ships with more cheap energy, or just pro bono to give them to the United Kingdom or to the United States. To those winners, but winners where? They dismantled economic ties, economies, shot dead economic producers. Anti-Russia sanctions triggered inflation, which exceeded the expected values in EU, US, Canada. One of the main investments in the increase on the food prices in Europe was caused by the challenges created by the EU for the Russian producers of agriculture and fertilizers. Inflation pressure increased the burden on the state budgets, compelled to allocate subsidies to consumers that aggravated the debt issue in Western countries. In 2023, the aggregate state debt of EU amounted to 89.6 GDP. Of course, this is not the United States, which exceeded its state debt, but the United States has a printing machine for money. And according to EU standards, the state debt should not exceed 60%. The highest rates and very sad figures are in Greece. This is 165.5%, Italy with 140%, France with 111%, and Spain with 109%, Belgium with 108%, and Portugal with 107%. The state debt of the United Kingdom reached 100%. But let me be honest. What does it mean when the state exceeds the production? Then it means that you take more for loans than you can return with the current figures. In fact, the most suitable word for that is bankruptcy. But every economist can say what it means. But the future was scheduled depending on the trends and the prices for energy, resources from Russia, its supplies, Russian decency as a supplier of oil and gas. Now they lost it. By the way, right now the European Union has blackmailing on behalf of Washington, whether it will provide gas or not. I think maybe they will depend on the weather and climate conditions. If it's warm in the EU, then they receive less gas and vice versa. As for the state debt of the United States, this is a funny story. This is $34 trillion. It's more than 130% from GDP. And this country, which says themselves as a civilized, dominating, developed leaders, despite these costs from sanctions from the initiators, the Western continues to is very sticky and suicidal Russophobic lease policy. But the West as the regime which brought together the countries which make money at the expense of their own people, the people of the free world as they call themselves, but free from every conscience. They try to shatter the expense of economic feasibility. They shatter the fundamental social and economic sustainability and well-being of its citizens. I think there are news much better, not about the West, but very interactive. Vladimir Putin went Northern Korea. It caused shock among the Western countries. We haven't seen such an hysteria for a long time. Of course, they exerted pressure on South Korea from Washington so that it can express its concerns. If we sympathize with South Korea because it lost its independence under the pressure of the United States, indeed put itself in a disadvantaged position. It almost refuses one time. The state can refuse only one time from its state interests. In the recent days, a number of high-ranking South Korean representatives made a public assessment on the agreement signed on June 19th between our president and the president of North Korea. The next day, the head of national security to the president of the Republic of Korea, Chan Ho-jin, reported on the decision of the government of South Korea to introduce unilateral sanctions against 4 vessels, 5 organizations, and 8 individuals of Russia, North Korea, and third countries who are allegedly complicit to trade with weapons between Russia and North Korea. He also updated on the plans to expand the list of anti-Russia and export and import restrictions up to 242 items. Previously, they were so that it will be 1402, and want to reconsider the former position of Seoul in its direct supplies of lethal weapons to Kiev. And I would like to ask South Korea if there is someone who can, with common sense, to once again read what was said by the National Security Advisor, Chan Ho-jin. The citizens of South Korea, are they aware of what they are going to? Extended sanctions against Russia were introduced by the West. And what will happen with South Korea? The same trends will be applied there. And they can ask for Japan, by the way, who overreacted and then started to count the figures and were sad about this. Supplies of lethal weapons to the Kiev regime, that is a new level of threats against its own people of South Korea from Seoul. On June 21st, the position of the government of South Korea was set forth by the Foreign Minister Kim Hon-yoon. Russia was accused, unjustified manner, that by signing this document, our country allegedly breached the UN Security Council resolution against North Korea, noting that cooperation with Moscow and Pyongyang threatened the security of South Korea. By the way, the conflict in Ukraine was compared to the Korean War of 1950 and 1953, saying that Russian actions were an aggression. Did they think that by such statements they view us as an integral state, one state, and only a few moments later, sometime later, they will understand what they talked about? Such blackmailing and threats against the Russian Federation is inadmissible. The president of the Russian Federation made a detailed answer on the topic of the relations between Russia and North Korea, saying that the new agreement is purely defensive and South Korea has nothing to worry about, because in accordance with the provisions of this document, military aid is rendered only in case one of the parties will suffer an aggression. So it's quite logic. Whether Seoul does not intend to attack Pyongyang, I hope that there are no thoughts about Russia, so why they make such a reaction which has nothing to do with common sense, or the South Korean authorities have some other thoughts, some phobias, some issues, mental disorders, and maybe the emergence of a new treaty between Russia and North Korea meddled with their plans, then you should be quite honest with your own people. As for the accusations against Russia, I would like to cite a very telling fact which demonstrates a peaceful, and I quote, nature of the Republic of Korea. During the visit of the President of Russia to Pyongyang, Seoul and Washington conducted on the Korean Peninsula 4-day drills with combat aircraft, which exercised some combat shellings over the Yellow Sea. And this happens, as you think, every day. For example, Macron goes to Canada, so the United States can, for example, conduct drills in that territory. We can enumerate many drills held by South Korea and the United States, but let me remind you of one of them. In August, there will be maneuvers with the use of nuclear weapons in case of a new conflict on the peninsula. It's absurd. Russia has always been accused by the West that we use an assertive language, that we publish some other articles, that our journalists put some wrong articles. But in fact, this is made on the region, which suffers a lot from tensions and conflicts, which turns into real aggravation of the situation on the ground. These drills with the use of the scenarios of the use of nuclear weapons. This is very telling and demonstrates the real potential aggressor to be. Such statements contradict commitment to dialogue with North Korea. Our country, being a permanent member of the UN Security Council, has advocated on several occasions and tabled initiatives that would de-escalate tensions and launch the complex of comprehensive settlement of the Korean Peninsula through diplomatic and political means. All of them, by the way, were denied by the United States and its allies, who backed only one thing: further bolstering of sanction and forced pressure on Pyongyang, which leads to nothing but confrontation. But I think that is the main goal of Washington. I would say Seoul, but in fact, Seoul cannot even breathe without Washington. As for accusations against Russia in waging the conflict in Ukraine, so these statements were made by the South Korean government. Such attacks are inadmissible. We've told a lot about the developments in Ukraine. I think we do not need to clarify our position, who delegated their sovereignty to the American hegemon. If they, regardless of the materials they have, repeat the American narratives, mantras, and so on and so forth, all these plans of Seoul to reconsider the position on supplies of lethal weapons to the Kiev regime would like to warn off the Republic of Korea from ill-thought steps which can lead to irreversible impact to the Russian and South Korean relations. Of course, we won't see without any indifference how the South Korean supplies are being transferred to the Ukrainian neo-Nazi to kill the civilians. The South Korean authorities, I think it is high time for them. If they make advices to us, then I shall advise to them. I think it is high time for them to liberate themselves from this maniac dependence on the United States, to wisely analyze the situation on the peninsula and to act to defend their own national security, their own people, not to satisfy the whims of the United States. And many questions we have received from all mass media on restrictions regime of the UN Security Council against North Korea, and that is continuation of this topic. We've heard the same about the South Korea, so let me clarify this issue. Russia traditionally perceives these restrictions against North Korea as an additional tool which make it possible to address complex tasks in peace and security in the framework outlined by the United Nations Charter. The sanctions cannot and should not hang over for decades over the whole countries and peoples because someone just thought to exert pressure the disobedient geopolitical opponent or to push forward their own initiatives. And of course, they must not aggravate and dismantle human rights. They care a lot. The level of life of people. We contradict such statements of the UN Security Council, and Russia, as a responsible member of the UN Security Council, values its status.
The Council's measures against the DPRK have become an absolute anachronism today, by no means harmless, in view of the negative effects they have on the national economy and population of this country. Let me note here with reference to the 2020 pandemic. Many countries under sanctions of the UN Security Council or under unilateral, illegitimate US sanctions, they suffered from the pandemic more, considering that they were cut from the logistics of medication supplies, from the opportunity to obtain urgent help. Many of these countries asked the international community to alleviate their condition. In response, the collective West said no. They saw Syria like they saw that, like Syria, they saw further exacerbation of the situation. Unilateral legitimate sanctions were additionally imposed on it. To give you an answer to the statement by the West that they care so much about human rights, and with reference to the sanctions against North Korea, this is their true goal and objective. The Council's measures, as I have already said, are now an absolute anachronism. Why they are falling short of the reality, it is an obvious thing. This anachronism is by no means harmless in view of the negative effect they have on the national economy and population of the country, and I refer to the pandemic to give you a case in point. One harsh decision of the Council was followed by another even more radical one, and nobody considered the implications of these decisions, and later this structure froze in time, causing irreparable damage to the prospects for negotiations, diplomacy. There was an impression that the West really derives pleasure from the suffering of people in the countries against which sanctions were imposed both by the UN Security Council or the United States, illegitimate, unilateral. We must not forget the illegally unilateral coercive measures of individual states or their associations, which further exacerbate the harmful humanitarian effect and undermine the remains of trust. This should be seen as a comprehensive issue, as opposed to individual things. We should differentiate. We should take this into account, both the declared steps and the actual effects. At the same time, the military activity of the United States and its allies is intensifying in Northeast Asia, posing a threat to stability in the region. The collective West does not give up hope of undermining the socio-political order of the DPRK, forcing the authorities of this country to take necessary steps to protect national security. Washington, which has chosen confrontation instead of dialogue, bears full responsibility for the impasse in the settlement process around the Korean Peninsula. As a result, the situation is really on a dangerous brink. The historical tragedy of our neighbors, the divided Korean people, is growing. The approach should be completely different. If all members of the UN Security Council are sincerely interested in a detente, and the sooner the better, modification of the sanctions regime against the DPRK could be an effective step in this direction, and Russia already suggested starting with the establishment of a specific chronological framework for it, with the possibility of revising a number of measures up to their abolition. But we are certain that a whole set of restrictions, economic restrictions, could be lifted immediately. Such a positive signal could help the parties concerned to engage in respectful conversation with due attention to the issue of reliable security guarantees. So far, our initiative has not been accepted by those who are against the DPRK, the obsessed with a destructive policy. Nevertheless, we call upon them to listen to the voice of their reasons, soberly assess the situation, find the courage to break the toxic status quo on the issue of eternal sanctions. Russia will continue promoting initiatives aimed at restoring calmness and stability at its eastern borders. At the same time, our activity in this area should not cause distrust or concern in those regional capitals or regions that are determined to maintain mutually beneficial, good, neighborly relations with our country. With regard to sanctions, the United States impose sanctions on the Kaspersky laboratory. To us, these sanctions represent a part of illegitimate sanction measures. It's a part of the hybrid war waged by Washington. But in addition to the Russophobic policy, the Biden administration is also being guided by quite obvious pet agenda. The Americans are settling scores with the foreign companies representing immediate competitors for Silicon Valley IT giants. In such cases, the United States does not shy away from any methods of unfair competition. They use everything. Suffice to recall the Huawei or TikTok situation, the Kaspersky Lab situation, and the Kaspersky has long been targeted by the United States, is in the same trend. The pretext for the current restrictions was the company's unsubstantiated accusations of some, and I quote, direct activities in the interest of the government of the Russian Federation. Probably they're only supporting them if they are against the interests of their national governments. Then it's the basket case. It's surprising to hear such statements from a country whose intelligence services keep on a short leash the largest IT corporations, including Apple, Google, Meta, Microsoft, and others. We're talking about the transfer of personal data, electronic correspondence of U.S. citizens. By the way, it violates the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, continuously invoked by the United States. And the businesses of other countries are also being subjugated. They should toe the line with the U.S. government. If a foreign business is not ready to make a deal with the FBI or the NSA, they are expelled from the American market under various pretexts. They either should act in accordance with the interests of the U.S. government or against their national governments. We should not have any illusions here, and I address all foreign partners here. The policy of Washington is predatory in nature, even more so as money or interests of intelligence services are at stake. In conclusion, I would like to mention important date. As we approach of June in 1988, the Interparliamentary Union was established. Rather, in 1889, the Interparliamentary Union, the oldest international parliamentary organization uniting legislative assemblies of 179 states, was founded. 14 international organizations, including the CIS Interparliamentary Assembly, have the status of associate members. The Union actively cooperates with the UN, shares its goals and objectives. Russia has been participating in the IPU since 1906. Our delegation is co-chaired by the chairperson, by the speaker, rather, of the Federation Council, Valentina Matvienko, and the Speaker of the State Duma, Vyacheslav Volodin. We have always regarded this organization as a priority mechanism for promoting common approaches to ensuring international stability and security, strengthening the contribution of parliamentarians to resolving present global and regional problems with unconditional respect for civilizational diversity and the right of states to sovereign development. Our country hosted IPU assemblies twice. The 100th was held in Moscow in September 1998. The 137th was held in October 2017 in St. Petersburg. The last one went down in history as a record-breaking one in terms of the number of participating parliaments: 160 delegates, 2,690 parliamentarians, 856, and 87 parliamentary speakers. The President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, took part in the opening ceremony in the assembly. Back in the day in St. Petersburg, together with the CIS Interparliamentary Assembly, an initiative was put forward to establish the Day of Parliamentarism, which was fixed by the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 72/278, interaction between the United Nations, national parliaments, and the Interparliamentary Union, adopted on the 22nd of May 2018. It is annually celebrated in honor of the first IPU conference held in Paris in 1889. At the same time, we have recently observed negative trends in the organization. as a result of as a result of actions of the Western countries after Russia recognized the DPR, the LPR, the biased position of the former president of the IPU, Duarte Pacheco of Portugal. He made it impossible for the Russian delegation to participate in the 144th IPU Assembly in 2022, where a clearly anti-Russian resolution on Ukraine was adopted. Following assemblies took part with the Russian participation, which confirms that this organization remains a place where Russia, despite the obstruction of the Western states, can influence the decision taken and really participate in the formation of a positive agenda on topical issues. At the 148th IPU Assembly in Geneva in March this year, attempts by representatives of Ukraine and other Western supervisors to exacerbate the situation around Russia did not find the support of the majority of foreign colleagues. We note with satisfaction that the general climate improvement many delegations which at the last moment reacted with caution to meetings with Russian parliamentarians, now they are more open, more ready for interaction. This momentum of support is well felt from the Arab world, including voting on contentious issues, and many Asian and African countries. We highly estimate the change in the chairmanship of the organization. Two liaisons from Tanzania was elected in 2023, to whom congratulatory messages were sent by the heads of the chambers of the Federal Assembly. We intend to continue to use the dialogue space of the IPU to counter hostile actions of unfriendly states and promote our approaches to building a fair and multipolar world order. We'll continue our active outreach work with constructive parliamentary members of the IPU and members of its leadership. And now I'm ready to take your questions, please. We are going to have a hybrid format here. We will start to the left of you. Pankratov from the CIS Institute, the Baltic States section. There is a growing number of Russian compatriots deported from Latvia. Does the Russian Federation have a special program to accept these individuals, to integrate further them into the Russian society? The Prime Minister of Estonia, Kaja Kallas, it is alleged is going to be the head of the European Commission. Does it mean that, or rather, is going to be one of the heads of the EU? Does it mean that the time for cooperation is over between Russia and the EU? Well, there is a program for interaction. And there's a program for acceptance of our compatriots. It is still available. It has been adjusted depending on the circumstances. There is a potential program for support on the ground through our foundation. There is a civic society, Gorchakov Foundation for one, provides its support. But in addition to this, there is also an immediate reaction that is being provided by our country, by our regions, based on the mandate issued by the Russian government. In addition to this systemic basis, there are also targeted responses to humanitarian cases. We focus on the subject in its totality. With regard to your statement about whether we are going to choose between diplomacy and aggressive steps. So it means that you call Borrell a diplomat. He called himself a diplomat, but he will go down in history, considering his experience, his duties. He used instead rhetoric of a complete aggressor. It is during the Borrell times that we saw total collapse of the EU diplomacy as a skill, as a competence, as an industry or area, if you will. But I think this is the trend that we're going to see in the future as well. But we're going to see high degree of delusion. But the trend was initiated by Borrell, obviously. Good afternoon. The Political Science Association, considering the official position of U.S. seniors on the terror attack on Crimea, and again exposing their nature, will they be able to pay for their sins they committed to Russia and to its people? I mean, sins is not something I focus. I think there's a higher institution, but I think God will deal with this. But during our every briefing, I mention practical feedback from our law enforcement authorities on the ground. With regard to your question, to me it is a piece of historical responsibility. They will be held accountable. Let me remind you of their past. Of course, we want them to be held accountable for the times of colonialism with money. We want them to pay for genocides of fascism and Nazism. We want them to pay for it in full. As we can see now, this process is not yet over. If they failed to seize the opportunity given to it by the international community at the outcome of the Nuremberg tribunals, if the denazification did not complete, then they should be further held accountable. It is here in St. Petersburg, in Leningrad, the city that is remembered as a city of suffering because of acts of Nazis and fascists. It is something well remembered here, even more so as all legal steps and decisions were taken to recognize the events as a genocide. For many years we called what happened the siege of Leningrad. It was a piece of reality with some fictional surroundings, but there is also a legal side to it, genocide, with a definition. Germany was given a chance to present itself as a responsible country after denazification, after taking relevant steps with regard to our citizens, veterans against our country and our people. Germany failed on this chance. In my opinion, this calls for relevant assessment. By way of reminder, Berlin decided to pay to siege citizens, if I may, to siege citizens of one nationality only. It means it continues the same idea of segregation. People cannot be divided on the grounds of ethnicity, given some more, some less, just because they have different bloodlines. It is insanity. They made a step further here, and it is also demonstrated on that same grounds as it used to be in the 30s, 40s. The MoFA of Germany received multiple notes from our side. Our ambassador to Germany explained this to official German representatives. The Russian foreign minister invoked this topic on multiple occasions. We mentioned this address in the Civic Society of Germany on multiple occasions, considering that they have real anti-fascist organizations. They are strong. They don't want this misfortune to repeat for Germany, but everything is futile. They continue paying compensations and making payments to siege participants only if they are of one ethnicity, Jews. The Russians, the Belarusians, the Moldovans, the Kyrgyz, the Kazakhs.
I even don't know how to enumerate them. There are ethnic Germans who had Soviet citizenship, but for example, the citizens of Baltic states, these are the same humans who suffered a lot. I haven't seen any research work, but I've read a lot about these facts to make a kind of conclusion on all the people went through because of the Nazis to not to eat enough food because of the ethnicity. I think it is strange to pronounce and to voice, but that is true. Yes, we witness how the colonies collapsed, empires collapsed, the states, the governments being on the top of its development. I see now how this Western world is being collapsed, the world of centuries old, even dominance. Apart from this historic process, I wish they started paying for all they did, for colonialism, for slave markets, for the Nazi frenziness, for the illegitimate occupation of the countries and dismantling sovereignty, in meddling in domestic affairs. I wish that would be true. I'm sorry for being so general, but you had such a question. Good afternoon. Lugavy Vladislav, BRICS Oceans, BRICS and Global South. I have not even a question, but a suggestion, if I may. Just brief initiatives, please. Yes, you can. Please proceed. The first one. The first forum brought together legal experts from different areas, across all areas. At its core was not to establish not a kind of annual meetings with the support of the Minister of Foreign Affairs that could be held and provide legal justification and to solve international conflicts, provide legal solutions to such conflicts. I think we have a scientific council which includes academicians who deal with international law. Secondly, and I mean firstly, we have legal experts, lawyers, who are high professionals in this area and are well known all across the globe. And this, as you say, area is being developed and exchange of expertise is being regularly conducted, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs participates in this forum as well in a very active way. Our legal experts, our divisions and sections help its organizers and participate in this forum. And my second question, if I may, and suggestion. Then we talked about the fund to help our competitors. That is another example of synergy between the foreign ministry and the civil society. I think this foundation was invented to help our competitors at the humanitarian track. Now it deals with legal issues and legal support. We also cooperate with the Association of Legal Experts. We deal with them in order to help our compatriots to find a solution to a terrible situation taken against them by unfriendly states. We have a wide network of cooperation with the legal community. It does not deal only with theoretic issues, but does it in practice as well. And my second suggestion, the world has changed, it became multipolar, it is becoming multipolar. Many world global conflicts synchronized and connected with the blockings by the West of centers of international trade corridors. Why, for example, at the United Nations basis or on the basis of a single space, security space, can be established a system that would make it possible to circumvent the conflicts where the countries are not friends, to conduct transit corridors or institutions that would exclude the possibility of using the factor of blocking the transport ways due to sanctions and other factors between BRICS countries. They are blocking to establish economic conditions. So please turn it over to me, and then I will turn it over to our legal experts, which deal with maritime law and all other transport corridors. I think this is a suggestion, as you said. So please turn it over to me. And my third suggestion, as for the historic memory. On the forum, this issue has been raised several times. And I have a kind of initiative that the BRICS countries establish and develop not a kind of guidebooks or handbooks, its own vision of the history of Russia. Just a single handbook starting from Belarus, for example, at the platform of BRICS. I have a question. We have such guidebooks. We've established them with Poland, and our MGIMO Institute dealt with this. And together with some other countries, we established the groups of scientists and researchers in order to search for some joint viewpoint of some complicated historic processes. We conduct this work on a regular basis, and previously with those whom we call unfriendly, because we wanted to overcome the legacy, this hard legacy of the past, not forgetting our history. It was a unique experience, not to forget our history, but at the same time not to prioritize it and not to be hostages to some contradictions and differences and conflicts we had in the past. And we had such an experience. But unfortunately, someone is against it. So in this very sense, my suggestion is that we can make a kind of commission of historic memory to the president, established within the president, not to dismiss the distortion of the results of the Nuremberg Tribunal or misinterpretation in the space of friendly states, to establish a kind of... So please turn it over to us, your suggestion. Can you have online international live? Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. Your introductory notes, you talked about the response of the Western officials after the terrorist act in Sebastopol, and you've mentioned the State Department Matthew Miller, who said that the United States supply weapons to defend its sovereign territory. So what is your comment on that? I can just repeat what we've published that with our statement in this regard. It was a detailed statement. I believe that the second point that I can add, we are aware of the fact that behind these legal words to cover this legal language, the United States are making their own, setting up their own goals to establish conflicts, to represent the Kiev that is viable, to maintain its Kiev during the Biden electoral campaign. Before that, they needed this because Biden family is engaged in this terrible business in Ukraine, because these are the interests of the military industry, transnational holdings. This is yet another opportunity to drag into another chaos and to control it. We know the root reasons of their plans. It has nothing to do with the desire to follow the letter of law And if they followed the law, I think they wouldn't be meddling in the Ukrainian agenda. They wouldn't be meddling in domestic affairs. I think we could have evaded many things. And in this case, this is just another attempt to find some other language to cover up its real plans, dirty plans, and illegitimate ones. Thank you very much. Let's move on. Is Ria Novosti with us? Yes, I see you here. How can you comment the liberation of Mr. Assange and information that he made a deal with investigative commission? As you know, I touched upon this subject. I was very scared by the fact that Mr. Assange said no word about when he left the courtroom. I thought that it's very strange and awkward. I don't want to draw any conclusions because I don't possess enough information on this. But we know him as a person who put at stake his life, his own life, for the truth. We also know that he went through all tortures, and as the UN rapporteurs said, that Assange went through tortures in the UK prison. So I believe that we need to wait for his comments and after that draw some conclusions depending on the situation on the ground. As for the general situation concerning Mr. Assange, I think this will make a foundation of many documentaries, films, memoirs, fiction. This story will become, and Mr. Assange himself will become an image for many peace works of all genres, of all kinds, because he unites in himself all the issues of the liberal democracy. I won't say that global ones, but for liberal democracy, that is for sure. I think these are the problems of the humanity, because the man was being tortured so much. I think no one could overcome such sufferings. And I know that our some citizens, for example, Viktor But, Maria Butin, Konstantin Yaroshenko, and many others, who told us in their memoirs what they went through when they were in the hands of the liberal democracy, That is a very tough thing. But Assange, as a center which brings together all the generative peculiarities of liberal democracies of the West, and hypocrisy, and the use of law for illegitimate purposes, and complete negligence of the law and commitments, its morality, ethics, values. The freedom of speech was dismantled. Journalists were also come into this category, being dismantled. The security of journalists, he suffered a lot. And it showed that this human right is used by the West as a tool. For example, if the West or the UK, say from high rostrums, be used in practice to Assange, I think he wouldn't spend many years in a very small room without sun and daylight in the Ecuadorian embassy. I think he would have accepted the investigators of the United States who wanted to know the truth, and the Ecuadorian's party made a chance to meet them in the embassy. Maybe they would think over his health condition. We can speculate a lot on these things, but nothing was done. And they repeat on the international platforms. They forget it almost overnight. As soon as they show the desire to revenge on the man who provided the global community the documents on illegitimate activities and actions of the Western regimes, and first and foremost of the United States, this revenge covered up all reasons and minds among everyone who spoke in public that they are committed to democracy, democratic values. Everything disappeared overnight. And I think you should be based on these provisions. First, we need to wait for his response by remembering that he has become a victim of the persecution, tortures, and the legitimacy against him, which had lasted for more than 14 years. And we did not know what they had done with this person. We can be based on the facts voiced by the human rights institutions, which had the mandate, who equaled the state at the last phase in the British, in the UK prison to tortures. Is Media Corporation of China with us? Yes, good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. We have two questions. Very soon on the SCO summit will be held in Astana. Belarus will become its 10th participant. The question, how can you comment about the expansion of SCO and what are the expectations of the Russian side? Indeed, full-fledged membership in the SCO will become one of the key results of the Astana summit, and we believe it is a great achievement, make a commitment to develop this forum, and I think our colleagues show when they included and decided to become the member. As for the expansion of the SCO organization, this proves that this organization is very effective, with consistent development, founded by 6 countries. Now it brings together 26 states. These are states, partners, and partners on dialogue, with geography extending from South and Southeast Asia up to Middle East and Europe, with a huge political, economic, and human potential, which makes it possible for SCO to increase its role in international affairs. This is a lively mechanism which is being developed, bolstered, adequately responds to the root changes in the global policy and economy. And I think you've heard a lot that we said that this organization can become one of the pillars of this polycentric new world architecture. And I think it will play an important role in cooperation and sustainable development in the Eurasia. The state leaders will adopt a number of documents targeted at advancing cooperation in policy, economy, and humanitarian ties, of course, with the main focus on suggestions on comprehensive modernization of the SCO activities at the current stage. We believe it is important to target it in order to resolve solutions for the prosperity, cooperation, and solidarity in Eurasia. Thank you very much. And my second question, this year marks 70th anniversary since China introduced 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. This is mutual respect of the sovereignty and territorial integrity, non-attack, non-interference in the domestic affairs, equality, and peaceful coexistence. What can you say about the principles in the current geopolitical situation and their relevance that would ensure the new political and economic world order? We appreciate these China initiatives aimed at building a just, multipolar world order, and we back and we maintain with our Chinese colleagues close cooperation in regional and international organizations Our positions on the main international issues coincide. As for the strategic cooperation, which makes an investment in the ensuring of global and Eurasian security on the basis of principle of indivisibility of security.
Let me sensitize you also to the joint statement made by the two leaders in Beijing this May. There is a phrase, in the context of a global turbulence, the Russia-China relationship passes well the test of stability. It goes through the best period of its history as independent centers of independent multipolar world order. Russia and China will take advantage of the bilateral potential for the sake of equitable and development of relations and consolidate its efforts on building fair multipolar world order. I think our effort to promote multipolarity together with the Chinese counterparts is something we're doing very well. It is in full swing. By the way, thank you very much. There is a good question that occurs to me. There is an issue or a notion of multipolarity, but there is also the notion of outside of the polar region. Well, there are a lot of variations with polar, and we have a lot to ponder over Moscow Post. Are you with us? Yes. Did Russia ask for assistance from other countries to investigate terror attacks in Dagestan? Is there a Ukrainian trace? I think the law enforcement authorities are working on this. They will comment on this. The second question, how do the MoFA experts assess the influence of sanctions on climate cooperation? Are there changes? Excuse me, what changes are you talking about? Are there changes in the Russian policy? I got it. Let's begin with question 2. Unilateral illegitimate sanctions imposed by the West, they destroyed everything, including our environmental cooperation. They destabilized the global economy, as we have said again, with specific examples. They destroy bilateral relations, they destroy peace and stability, and also cooperation on the environmental aspect. The sanction pressure of the West really reduced null potential opportunities for mutually beneficial cooperation with these countries to address this global problem. Now, to our position, we remain committed, we remain responsible participants to international documents in the climate domain, and we fulfill our obligations in full. The UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Climate Agreement, as well as the decisions adopted under their auspices, we continue to actively participate in all activities under the convention. Additionally, we are stepping up our cooperation on this same subject in such formats as BRICS Plus, the EAU, and others too. We are pursuing bilateral cooperation on that same subject as well. The Russian Federation consistently promotes the inadmissibility of imposing unilateral economic measures that circumvent the United Nations Security Council. The decision of the 28th session of the Conference of the Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which was hosted by Dubai from the 30th of November to the 13th of December 2023. It recognized that the parties to the Paris Agreement should cooperate to promote a supportive and open international economic system that would lead to sustainable economic growth and development in all countries, thus enabling them better to address the problems of climate change. Here's the answer to your question. Obviously, Western sanctions are a direct contradiction to this provision. Thank you. Reuters, are you with us? Good afternoon. Yes. You have, in fact, answered our question with regard to North Korea. I would just like to clarify the sanctions that you caused anachronism against North Korea. Is Russia ready to withdraw from this sanctions regime, which is a point of concern in the West, and what other countries Russia is ready to make agreements with, similarly to that concluded with North Korea? As I have said, we are ready to discuss this issue. You are a media outlet from an unfriendly country, and you're always driving towards confrontation. You're asking us about withdrawal. We are asking you about a discussion. Not you, but everyone who promotes the same mentality. Why can not countries or international organizations enjoy their relevant rights? Let's go back to discussions of human rights. Let's have a look at sanctions and their negative effect on human lives. Let's have a look at all this. Each other looking in the eye, and let's find a solution to this situation. An individual is at the forefront. It's not only gender change, but also daily provisions, water and bread, their survival amidst the pandemic. We had recently been struck by its suddenness, but strangely, human rights are boiled down to gender, to single-sex issues. As for other rights, they are being neglected, that existed for millennia. Let's have a look at the sanctions against North Korea and their effect on human lives, on the development of economy, of civil industry, and the implications of such sanctions, and why should not we discuss this in a responsible manner? This is the approach that we would promote. What about other countries? Should you repeat now the question about the withdrawal? No, I would like to draw attention to the aspect of other countries. With what other countries is Russia ready to conclude a similar agreement with? Well, there is a whole range of agreements and arrangements. It is a treaty that is concluded on a mutually beneficial, mutually respectful basis. You mean literally repeating letter after letter? Well, I mean a treaty of comprehensive cooperation and partnership. I don't want you to present my answer as Russia would conclude a similar treaty with other countries. No, we conclude a treaty with individual countries with its nuances and specifics that would be okay for the both parties. We're currently working on a treaty, but do not present it as a treaty similar to the one concluded with North Korea. We're currently working on a treaty with Iran, but please do not parade it as some language. If there is willingness, deliberate willingness to change or distort information. Now moving on. News RU. Are you with us, Ms. My name is Olga Yablova. We have two questions, Ms. Zakharova. The first one, the Armenian Security Council Secretary said that Russia took Nagorno-Karabakh that was later passed on to Azerbaijan. Armen Grigoryan said this. He said this today. What he said was, Armenia was completely dependent on Russia, and that's why Yerevan found itself in this war. Please comment on his statement. Are you serious? I doing site reading. In what year did this happen? He probably refers to 2020 confrontation when Nagorno Karabakh became part of Azerbaijan. Armen Grigoryan is the name of that person, Secretary of the National Security Council of Armenia. Maybe it isn't a secretary. A secretary woman maybe is the case in point. I mean, there are some things you cannot comment on unless you have a medical degree. I do not have any competences here, but there is no way you can consider this. The main point is that while representing power, such officials really humiliate their own people. The citizens of Armenia defended their territory. They sacrificed their lives. They attach historical importance to this. The ideology of Armenia as a state has been building for years on these points. They responded to the calls of the government, of political, civic activists, and they knew what they were fighting for. They knew what they sacrificed their well-being for. They knew what they sacrificed, for what they exchanged the widowship of their spouses for, and now they betray things like this. Previously, it was called a feat in Armenia. Who gave the right to those temporary positioned people that are supplied from the outside? Who gave them the right to insult their own people? I think the Armenian people, it is for the Armenian nation to answer this question. Surprisingly to me, however, that people in an irresponsible and humiliating manner treat the historical manner of their own nation, the nation that has suffered a lot. These people went through tremendous historical challenges. Their memories are full of tragic chapters of the modern history. Thank you very much. Our second question, if I may, of course, what is Moscow's take on the intention of the Alternative for Germany party of Germany to create a party of sovereigns, of extreme right parties? They're ready to call for negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. They're going to build on a declaration developed by the Balkan nationalistic party revival, which intends to expedite the negotiations. How can you comment on this? I only saw some reports in the Western media about these trends. It is the domestic affair of Germany, of German voters and their civic society. If they're serious about this, if such plans are implemented, indeed, it will be indicative of the fact that a significant portion of European voters have a growing demand for putting an end to the current reckless policy of the leaders of the European Union that have been turning the Kiev regime into a terrorist regime while pushing Ukraine to chasm. We see these trends, the realistic approach of the European voters from the recent election to the European Parliament. We hear their opinions in the interviews of MPs and political activists supported by people, if it results in some specific political initiative, then we will be able to say common sense ultimately prevailed. But again, I repeat, it is for them to decide. It is the interior policy of this country. But at some point, you need to wake up. I was asked a question recently, similar to the one you have posed, but it concerned the UK, and they refer to the Politico quotation where it was the West who provoked the Ukraine development. I was asked, what is your take on this, seeking to present him as yet another Kremlin agent? You can find a term yourself for a person who would call that, who would say that 2 plus 2 makes 4. Well, you can pick a term to describe such a person yourself. It isn't just our position. It is an actual situation as it is. There is a huge information bubble created by the West. As opposed to it, there is historical fact, historical sequence, objective reality. If you don't have any other questions left, then moving to Vestnik Kavkaza. Good afternoon, Ms. Zakharova. What is of the Georgian party's appeal, solidarity for peace, to restore diplomatic relations between Russia and Georgia? Is Russia ready to take this step? Should Georgia voice this initiative? Let me remind you that it was Saakashvili's regime that initiated the severance of ties between Russia and Georgia. After that, there were different contradicting conditions for the restoration of the relationship, considering different realities in the region. In 2012, the Georgian authorities suggested starting normalization, the bilateral relationship, immediately supported by Russia. And it is still our stance that it meets the interests of our peoples that have common history, culture, strong economic ties, millions of human lives connected. We support any initiatives that would contribute to the support of the Russian-Georgian normalization. In this context, we welcome the initiative and we are ready to take this path. Thank you. Thank you. Baku TV, are you with us? Baku TV is here. Good afternoon, Ms. Zakharova. Colleagues from St. Petersburg, we have two questions. You have touched upon the first one, but I will still mention this. On Sunday, Dagestan saw horrible terrorist attacks. We present our condolences, and after the elimination of terrorists, analysts and political scientists unanimously said that it was an attempt to drive a wedge between peoples and confessions. Additionally, there was a version that the British services might be involved in these terrorist attacks. And there was also a version that the main target was priest Nikolai of the Baku diocese. What is the take of the MFA? Is there anything to add? I repeat, we firmly condemn hostile attempts, hostile attacks that took place on the 23rd of June in Makhachkala and Derbent. I again extend the warm words of support and our condolences to friends and families of the victims. The investigative office of the investigative committee of Russia for Dagestan initiated a criminal case on the grounds of crime, which is the terrorist attack. Our law enforcement authorities will find out all the circumstances. They will find those to blame, the culprits, including organizers and paymasters. As for the countries who are behind this, a lot can be said, and history remembers a lot too. But now it is important that we find out everything.
So that to clearly understand all reliable information, and after that come to conclusion. This region of our country has been a target of aspirations of the Anglo-Saxons to sow interethnic discord, and that is a well-known fact, but these attempts are doomed to failure. Russia will continue to take measures to stem terrorism, extremism, both at home and internationally in cooperation with its partners. Thank you. And my second question. Armenia, following Ukraine, will receive self-propelled howitzers Caesar. This contract was signed during the visit of the Minister of Defense of Armenia to Paris, where he met with his counterpart, and this meeting was warm and fruitful. What can you say about such actions of the French authorities, and why do they insist on supplying weapons not only Ukraine but Armenia right now? On the one hand, this is a part of the politics of Paris to be everywhere and not to bear any responsibility. If they treated with responsibility all conflict resolutions, then they would follow, for example, these Minsk agreements. In fact, they had some other plans. They wanted to support the Kiev regime on anti-Russia track. In fact, all these peaceful agreements and Minsk agreements were ignored by Paris. And this is a quote from François Hollande following Angela Merkel's statements. On the other hand, we understand, if we talk about the region of Caucasus, we are aware of the fact that we have a peaceful plan for normalization of situation there, for opportunities of economic and humanitarian character to build logistics and transport communication, for further advancement of mutual cooperation, and this is in line with the agreements, with the relevant agreements signed between Baku, Yerevan, and Moscow. And Moscow is a mediator, honest, transparent, open, which sees both parts as both countries as their neighbors, good neighbors, and being interested, a stakeholder in the profits, such as peace and stability, which will bring to us as a state. And of course, this causes jealousy among the Western countries, who now believes this is the zone of their interests and failed to achieve any progress on peaceful settlement. They just prepare another chaos, and maybe we'll see it as a kind of revenge for the peaceful efforts by Russia with tangible results, and outline the path from this multi-year impasse. We have found this path. All was left is just to implement and practice, to put them into practice. But as you know, I think there is a word expression. There are two counselors on our shoulders. One counsels something good, and one counsels the other, while the other counsels something bad. And I think among those who table such initiatives, I refer to Paris, I think these are bad advisors, which can lead to a big tragedy. This is a forceful language, not in terms of peaceful settlement, but in terms of inciting the conflict potential once again. And these are the words of the French officials. And the sad thing that they shall bear no responsibility, and common people will suffer, which will endure the repercussions of another conflict that will be once again cannon fodder, whose ambitions will be ignored. That comes along one and the same scenario. Once again, we have all the agreements on the table. signed in 2020. And that was our statement, that everyone strives for peace. And that is the pathway we need to follow. I would like to say a couple of words and to reiterate that Paris is guided not by the interests of Armenia or its people, but strives to use Yerevan as a tool for its selfish interests. And I can cite you some evidence. There were many countries in the world, especially former French colonies, were tied together with France. These were joint projects, business projects, and there was a kind of joint history, shared history. And Paris abandoned them many times. Now see New Caledonia, for example, Mali, where France just withdrew. There are many examples. Of course, I'm aware of the huge diaspora living in Paris, the people who are connected with Armenia. But they will receive no guarantee from this destructive policy pursued by Paris in some other points and places of the world. Unfortunately, I wish I were wrong, but the prospects are very gloomy. I think Paris will become the force which will turn Yerevan back from the real settlement, tangible settlement, for the benefit of another venture. Thank you. Is Great Asia with us? Yes, Maria Zakharova, good afternoon. We have one question. Today, the whole world is going through post-crisis period, both in terms of political and diplomatic and legal areas, and that is why the St. Petersburg International Legal Forum is very significant. We know that it's not the first year when you actively participate in it, supported right initiatives, and defend its traditional values. What are your expectations from this legal forum started today? Can it approach us to the transformation of the system of international justice? And can we speak that Russia should take responsibility at this historic period, a pioneer, the role of pioneer, global leader in the formation of the new legal architecture of international relations? Thank you very much. But I think we need to expand the framework of your words and to include the whole Ministry of the Foreign Affairs, which make tangible investments in terms of concept ideology and practical implementation. And this is the position of the ministry. And here we just representatives of the ministry who participate in various events. This forum, the St. Petersburg International Legal Forum, has become one of the most important events for the legal community and platform for exchange expertise, bolster contacts and cooperation between representatives of various law schools. One of the core segments will be dedicated to international law. As you see the desire of the collective West to abandon this international law, to replace it with a rule-based order. Now international law is going through a huge test. The rule-based order, according to the Western models, does not mean equal participation of all the states concerned in the formation of these tests. It does not in line with the aspirations of all the people. It does not mean equal responsibility before law. This is yet another example of satisfying the whims and ambitions of one selfish group of countries. By the way, the international justice system are being under unprecedented pressure. I speak about the International Court of the United Nations. Some agencies lost their independence. Some of them are trying to be replaced with the current agencies of interstate agencies because of the selfish purposes. So this forum provides a good opportunity for an open, active, and professional discussion of these processes and the means of prevention of these destructive trends. There is no other alternative to the international law based on the UN Charter, which enshrine the general principles and norms of international law. I think that is quite obvious. International legal topic has been talked a lot about, and there were many forums dedicated to this topic, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs is an active participant. It also helps to organize a number of sections dedicated to international justice. So hopefully, our investment will be highly appreciated, and we believe that we will work closely on this track. Thank you. As you know, by the way, I think it will be quite a long statement. Right now, one of the topics which is being now at the front line. But why? In fact, Interpol exists for over 1 century. It proved everything to everyone, that it can be a platform for mutually beneficial dialogue, even during crises. And once Russia included to Interpol, respected as a good faith participant with its strong position in combating such challenges as transnational organized crime, international terrorism, and so on. By the way, we witnessed all these trends we were talking about, including they were manifested at this platform. Such politicization concerned the decision of the General Secretariat of Interpol of the 10th of March to ban the processing of information concerning Crimea by the Russian branch. Within these years, the Peninsula has shaped its own competent authorities that ensure and protect the rights of citizens, and refusal of cooperation is a breach of Article 2 of the Universal Human Rights Declaration, and which says there should be no distinction based on legal status of the country belonging to the person, regardless this territory independent, non-self-governing, or some other restricted in its sovereignty. End of quote. Starting February 2022, the politicized agenda of Interpol was developed and reached an unprecedented biasness. Interpol has started to transform from professional platform into a kind of another implementation of geopolitical interests of the United States, the European Union. Just see, the leaders, the senior officials of Interpol deliberately trying to isolate Russia. So why, in March 2022, started to adopt the decision because of the situations in Ukraine? What is this decision? This is about restrictions, about information transferred by the Russian Federation through international police channels. It is not about some notices issued upon the initiative of the Russian law enforcement authorities, but all correspondence of the national branch of Interpol, the use of Interpol database on the travel documents, theft, stolen, access to registries including wanted lists, and who suffers. And just ordinary people are suffering, first and foremost on the European continent, just because law enforcement authorities cannot trace the relevant information. And why? Because there is a political order, politicized order. This March, the restrictions against Russia were once again extended, and the Secretary General of the Interpol during the next session, for the first time ever, and we know no such example about other countries, put on vote full suspension of Russia's access to the Interpol database. Unfortunately, to the West, all the sensible nations did not back this decision and decided to voice contrary. The mass information trying to call to exclude and to delist Russia from Interpol, for example, Trudeau, the Minister of Canada, the ministers of UK, Lithuania are whipping up this information in the mass media. And who will benefit if Russia shall not be a party of Interpol? The Secretary General has not responded to these statements because he's under their pressure. On the February 20th this year, the New York Times released an article by Jane Bridley. Weightlifters find new ways to abuse Interpol channels despite the years of reforms. This is an article about the Russian Federation, which is, along with China, Turkey, allegedly uses Interpol channels for political purposes, de facto abusing them. What political purposes? How can you abuse these channels? It refers to the information released in the Interpol database. By the way, it interprets itself, deliberately falsifies this information, trying to shift the blame on Russia, like this representative of the US State Department on the question on the reciprocal measures of the Russian Federation because of the banning of 3 Russian mass media in the European Union, said that this proves the fact that Russia jeopardizes free journalists. And this is just a response, reciprocal measures. If anyone could read to him, I think he makes it deliberately. If someone at this very moment told him, please read the statement of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, which says that once the European Union abandons its own decisions to ban the Russian mass media, then these steps will be followed by Russia as well, and Russia will lift such bans on the European mass media in Russia. But they distort such information, and likewise. And this information, the release of such information, has initiated yet another campaign to discredit our country, and this is made deliberately. The upcoming of the 92th session of the General Assembly of Interpol to be held in Glasgow in November 4th, 7th of this year. By the way, some other states suffer from this policy who conduct sovereign policy. This is yet another block for you and for the legal experts, international legal experts, analyzes a negative example on how these legal fundamentals are being distorted, repercussions at the global level, and how to confront and address these challenges. Because transformation of another professional agency into a tool of political pressure, this is not just a flagrant abuse of fundamental principles of Interpol, but this is an attack on the whole family of international legal pillars and institutions. This undermines all the fundamentals of international law, and by the way, by the international cooperation as well, which should be based on mutual respect, not become a hostage of some other selfish political ambitions. This is yet another topic for very interesting discussions, which can be raised here at this legal forum. I'm sorry for being so long. This is a very interesting example. Your question. Is compatriots together with us?
Good afternoon, Ms. Zakharova. We're considering the topic of the forum. If a citizen of Ukraine acquires a Russian citizenship, Ukraine deprives that citizen of Ukrainian citizenship does the passport of a citizen of Ukraine become invalid for us or for other countries in such a case? You are very optimistic. You think it is only the citizenship the Ukrainian regime is depriving their citizens of. They are ready to deprive them of their rights, of their life. They destroy an individual in a moral and physical manner. Not only for the Russian passport, but also for celebrating common celebrations with Russia. But turning to the legal aspect, the thing is that when a citizen acquires citizenship of the Russian Federation, it is of legal importance for Russia, as opposed to the number of passports an individual might have. It is enshrined in our legislation, paragraph 1 of the Article 10 of the federal law on the citizenship of the Russian Federation, that a citizen of the Russian Federation who has dual citizenship or multiple citizenships is considered by the Russian Federation only as a citizen of the Russian Federation. In this regard, we proceed from the fact that for the Russian authorities, a document certifying the identity of a Russian citizen who also has another citizenship, including Ukrainian citizenship, is a passport of a citizen of the Russian Federation, which must be presented in cases where it is provided by law. We don't receive any information from the Ukrainian side on the termination of the Ukrainian citizenship, and we don't have any official information on the position of foreign states on this issue. This is about it. Whenever an individual acquires Russian citizenship, he also or she takes an oath of a citizen of the Russian Federation, where they state that they swear to abide by the constitution and legislation of the Russian Federation. If it is it, or are there any other questions? If there are no more questions left, then thank you so much for participation. It is always a pleasure to visit St. Petersburg. I return here as if I return home. Sometimes I feel like I miss St. Petersburg. Should I not visit it for a while? Thank you very much for your attention. All the best.